when you step into that level of grief, it's like, okay, good. You can mourn the loss of the
Yeah.
thing that you didn't have because I think unfortunately it's like, what I used to say going back, I'm painting a picture here. Going back to this idea of the stubbornness, I would go, my childhood didn't impact me. Are you sure? And I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure
You're
I was
lying to
pushing
yourself.
50 pounds, smoking 2 packs a day, drinking myself to sleep. You sure? And
Yeah.
so what I wanna talk about and move into a little bit deeper here is that place of acknowledgement in the beginning, right? For
Mhm.
15 years, you kept these secrets,
Right.
right? And then
Mhm.
longer, you've gone through this process of healing. You're continually stepping into it.
Mhm.
And I think that there's some truth that the truth will set you free.
Right.
And I wanna go into that a little bit deeper here because I wanna know about the impact that going on this journey has actually had in your life.
Mm. Wow. It has, if you had told me 8 years ago I'd be doing today what I'm doing now, I would have laughed you off the face of the earth because I mentioned a retreat program I'm part of. I went into that first retreat calling myself the holy exception. I'm a Christian, so my life's based off the Bible. And I went in saying that everything in the Bible was good enough for everybody else but me. I was too screwed up, too far gone. I was a waste of space. I was imploding again. And I went in with that mindset. And just through the opportunity to be, through the opportunity to be real and to kind of start taking off those masks. And we talked a lot about having to forgive ourselves. And that's a hard part. That's a critical part of this healing and the grieving. You talked about needing to grieve our stories. I did not realize how much loss my story has. And some of this I learn about myself the more I speak. When I say I didn't have a chance to have a normal childhood, that's more of a realization that's come up in the last year. And I think I knew that, but I didn't know how to put words to it. But it starts making more sense. So I think that the whole grief journey is a critical part of our stories that cannot be bypassed. I had different times where I just totally lost it. My greatest fear was realized and my greatest fear was shattered all at the same time. My greatest fear, and probably the same for many of your listeners, if I tell somebody, I'm going to cry and I'm never going to stop. And that was my greatest fear. And yeah, I cried and I cried hard and I'm like heaving crying for 10 minutes. And yet that circle of friends you talked about came beside me. They knew what was going on and they just loved me and accepted me and let me cry. And they grieved with me. And then my greatest fear stopped. I did because at some point in time that well of grief will empty. It may not fully empty. There's still little things like now, when it comes back, but it's not a debilitating grief. It's more of a sadness and a thankfulness for the healing that has happened. I never want to be disconnected from the emotion of everything I have gone through because I disconnected myself emotionally for decades, for over 4 decades. Because again, I just went into recovery from an eating disorder in 2016. So I had all that time where I didn't know how to deal with emotions. I never want to disconnect again. But because of the hard work, those emotions don't overtake me to the point that I can't control them. The anger I feel at the injustice that was done to me is no longer rage. I have reached a point, and for some, this sounds really weird, but I have reached a point where I am able to have compassion against my rapist. Not everybody gets to that point, but I'm able to get to that point now because my situation happened in the early 70s. Rape was not on the radar. It wasn't something to be discussed. No one knew to ask anything, and I didn't know to say anything. So if it wasn't on the radar for me, What was Bobby experiencing where he acted out? That was an angle it took me a long time to get through and to get to. And not everybody gets there. And you're not expected to get there. That's just where I ended up with my work. But that is the power of grief because until we own our story, we can't grieve our story. That first year at retreat, that's what happens. I owned my story. I was in denial about my story. I hated my story and I hated myself. And I didn't think I was lovable because I had no experience saying I was lovable. As far as I knew, nobody cared because they sure had a funny way of showing. And I left that experience of being around these people knowing that I had some value. But mostly, I learned to start forgiving myself. Not that I did anything wrong that day, but forgiving myself and letting myself off the hook for not dealing with it up to and healing. When Michael and I were saying that those first 3 years of healing are, this is what we mean. This is some of the stuff, that gut level stuff that has to be worked through in order to be able to start building on that foundation. Because you're not going to believe that you're worthy if you're still blaming yourself for something. And you might be blaming yourself for something that's a total lie, but it's truth to us because that's all we've ever known until we have other people in our lives come in and help shatter that lie and start speaking that truth to us. Because just like Michael said, it's the truth that sets us free. And we have to set that story straight. We've told ourselves a story about what happened ever since it happened, but that story isn't fully accurate. And that's what has to get worked out. And that's where that gut wrenching first few years comes in because you're facing your story. And that means letting somebody challenge you to the different characters that are in it. And did this person really play that role? And what role did you really play? Okay, so for me, it came into blaming myself. I woulda, shoulda, coulda. I lived in woulda, shoulda, coulda land for so long. And I learned that I was putting 50-year-old expectations on a 7, and I wasn't being fair. I wasn't helping that 7-year-old little girl heal. That 7-year-old little girl was just, thinking, "Hey, cool, there's something to see in the woods." Childhood curiosity. But I had to forgive myself for that because, again, not that I did anything wrong, but the story I had told myself is what was wrong. And that's where I had to let myself off the hook so that I could then own the real story of what happened, put the responsibility where it really belonged, and continue to own that. And then start feeling that grief so that I could work through that and finally realize that the rape was not my fault. That was the hardest homework my counselor ever gave me. When I first told her when we were first dealing with it, was 10 times a day, look in the mirror and say out loud, the rape was not my fault. And up to then, I had said it wasn't my fault. And she's like, no, not it. Name it. The rape was not my fault. And the first 2 days, it was the rape was not my fault. The rape was not my fault. Very dispassionate. And then I started changing. The rape was not my fault. The rape was not my fault. The rape was not my fault. And it became emphasis on different words. And now it's truth. It was true before, but now I believe it. That's some of the stuff that we're talking.
I'm sitting with that because it brings to mind these moments in time in my own experience and many people I've seen in which like you have this, for lack of a better way to phrase it, this like coming to Jesus moment, right? Where you're like, oh, hold on a second, what is happening here? For you coming through that, like, what did that look like? I would love if you would paint a picture of really kind of the next phase in this journey for you, going from that mindset of victim into what was next, because there's that transition period, right? And I look at mine, it was 3 years for
Yeah.
me. 3 years. So I'd love for you to talk about what that was like and the shift that happened in the journey for you.
Yeah. So let's see. So more backstory on this just to give the audience some more context. So at the age of 25, that was when I quit my last freaking night job. I worked up to 4 jobs, putting myself through college while building a business because that was the only way I can do it. I'm a big fan of NF, and he has a song called Options. And it says, I got to make it or make it. These are the options. And I finally thought I made it. I finally thought that I made it. And literally 3 months later, after buying the dream house and the dream car, which I came from a very humble beginning, so that was not like a gigantic car or a gigantic house. But I finally thought that I made it. 3 months later, I was interviewing neurosurgeons. Couldn't remember how to get home. I'm right-handed. I couldn't open my hand all the way because of nerve damage. My right foot was literally curling up, and I was walking with a limp on it, and I could barely remember how to spell my name. And what they told me is you have Chiari malformation. And for the audience that's probably not super familiar about that because it's very rare. And also they are just starting to finally be able to properly treat it. There's about 5 Chiari specialists in the United States that truly, truly specialize it, or at least back then that was the case. Anyways, that means your brain doesn't physically fit in your skull and is beating into your skull every single time your heart beats. And I had a big, big pity party. I felt like a victim. I felt like I was cursed. I felt like I felt like everything that I worked for literally meant nothing. Like I literally felt like I was just getting laughed at by the universe. It was like, screw you, Mallissa, you're cursed. And I felt like that for a long time. I felt like that basically for the majority of 2015. But every single day I would try to get up and I would try to act like I didn't feel that way. I tried to go back to who I used to be. I tried to sit there and be like, okay, like I'm just going to pretend this didn't happen. And that just makes it worse every single time because I wasn't coping with the emotions and the fact that I felt like I was not fulfilling my potential. I wasn't working through and understanding that all of these surgeries, because I had to get 12 of them back to back, all of these surgeries were painful, but the most painful thing was knowing that I could die spontaneously and I gave up on my dreams. I wasn't confronting any of these emotions. And it wasn't until I started really, really going through and being like, okay, who you used to be doesn't exist anymore. You need to build the new version of yourself. That was the only pivotal moment that I could do something because every single morning I'd get up and try to act like I was who I used to be. And then I would black out and be bedridden for about 2 to 3 days because I was not able to even be upright for more than 3 hours at a time. So that's what that transition looked like. It came to accepting it. It came to seeing other people with the same condition I had dying spontaneously that would give every single second that they possibly could to have the 3 hours I had with my ability to stand upright. And what was I going to do with it? Was I going to just flush it down the drain and be a victim? Or was I going to make something out of it? And that acceptance phase, going through the emotions and seeing that there are other people going through the same thing I was, that was the big transformation in which I realized, okay, what am I going to do with this adversity? What does it mean? I get to dictate what it means, and everybody does.
And I think that it's okay to be scared about that because it's unknown territory. And even today in this moment, you're doing something you've never done before for the first time. So, like, you can have grace, you can have empathy for yourself. But I think really if you want to step into what's next in your life, you've got to be willing to do the difficult things. And so one of the things that I appreciate about you, and I know that you've been able to do in having difficult conversations, is starting your podcast. And one of the reasons that I did and created Think Unbroken is I was like, I want to put together the thing that I need for other people, that I need for me, that I need for the world. And in a sense, this is kind of right because I'm always getting to learn from people. What do you think is one of the most important lessons that you've learned from other people in your journey of healing?
Ooh. We've had a ton of people on the podcast. It's the perspective of the world. While we have our own worlds and it's important that we take care of ourselves, it's also really, really important to understand what's going on in other people's lives. What other people deal with on a daily basis is going to be completely different. It could be similar, but a lot of times it's really different from what we go through in life. To be able to sit down with over 80 people now and hear stories about someone who was in a house fire, someone who was sexually assaulted, someone who had cancer, someone who's going through chemotherapy, So many different stories. Someone who went through a huge weight loss campaign, lost a lot of weight. You learn about what people go through mentally and physically, and how they deal with the things in their lives. And it's so powerful to gain that perspective and understand that we all are going through something difficult. If someone's not showing that, they might be a good actor, but we're all going through stuff on a daily basis. And it's important to have that perspective and understand that, so we can show more compassion towards other people. Uh, it's huge. And like I said, there's this dichotomy, because you said we have to be kind to ourselves, and we also have to be real with ourselves. And that's a balance, right? You can't be so hard on yourself that you destroy yourself. And you can't be so easy on yourself that you never go anywhere. So there's this balance that needs to be found. And when we say balance, I think people get confused that they literally have to balance it right now. I think with balance, you go one way and then you adjust to kind of balance it out, right? I went really hard on myself. I got really hard on myself, not just hard on myself and like I suck, right? It's hard on myself like, hey, I don't like this about me. I don't like that. I don't like how I do that. I don't eat right. I don't stretch. I don't go to the gym. I don't run. I don't like that about myself. And I don't listen when I'm in conversations with people. I just talk about myself. Those things, like that self-awareness you build is insane. It helps you grab control of the life that you have. And inherently, we can only control us. We can't control other people. But what you said with the podcast, with perspectives, it's important to be able to step into other people's shoes and hear their stories.
Thank you so much for listening to Think Unbroken. Please share this episode with someone who could use it and help us move forward in our mission of ending generational trauma in our lifetime. And if you would, please take 5 seconds to pop on iTunes or Spotify, hit that 5-star, leave a review, and you can also reach out to us on social at Michael Unbroken or at Think Unbroken. And of course, you can check out our YouTube channel at Think Unbroken. Thank you for being a part of Unbroken Nation, my friends, and until next time, be unbroken.